We're starting to get some viewership data in for the Amazon Prime Lord of the Rings series, The Rings of Power, and things are not looking too good for it right now. According to some of this data that's being cited, it's getting around half the audience that the season 1 premiere of The Rings of Power got. Some people might have some issue with the methodology in which they're actually getting this data from, and I will address that in a moment. But first, let's look at this article from Comic Book Resources that's talking about it. The headline, Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power Season 2 ratings reveal awful news for Amazon. Jumping down into the article here. The second season of the Lord of the Rings adaptation is off to a shaky start. Deadline has reported that according to data collected from Samba TV, the season 2 premiere of The Rings of Power garnered 902,000 household viewers in its first 4 days of streaming. This is a noteworthy decline from season 1's premiere, which drew in 1.8 million households in only 3 days, almost double what season 2 premiered with. Right out of the gate, you can see a problem with this, with the lack of viewership numbers for season 2, but also I want to emphasize this point right here. It's measuring it for the first 3 days for season 1 of The Rings of Power and the first 4 days for season 2 of The Rings of Power, which means there was more of an opportunity for people to have watched season 2 of The Rings of Power for the premiere episode. And even then, it still has around half the viewership. So if you had more of an apples to apples comparison where it was a 3-day measurement for the viewership for season 2 of The Rings of Power, well, then you would see there's probably less than half the people who actually watched the season 1 premiere of the show watched the season 2 premiere of the show. And this kind of coincides with what we saw with season 1 when it came to viewership decline. We have this article from That Park Place that came out several days ago, but it's talking about the viewership decline between the first episode and the last episode of The Rings of Power. While Amazon, like other streamers, provide only limited data, and internally it held information even more closely than usual on the series, sources confirm that Rings of Power had a 37% domestic completion rate, customers who watched the entire series. In other words, around 63% of the people who started watching season 1 of the Rings of Power actually finished it. But like I was pointing out, how it's not new in a fair comparison between the premiere episodes of season 1 and season 2 because it's measuring a different time frame. So I'm going to try to make it a little bit more equal. So they said for the first 4 days of season 2 of the Rings of Power, it got 902,000 viewers. So let's divide that by 4. That means it's getting around 225,500 viewers per day. So let's multiply that by 3 because that's what they were measuring for the first 3 episodes of or they were measuring it over a 3-day time period for season 1 of the Rings of Power. That means in the same time frame for season 2, it got 676,500 viewers. And if you divide that by the 1.8 million that they say season 1 got, then you get 37.6% of the viewership. That means out of all the people who tuned in for season 1 of the Rings of Power for the premiere episode of season 2, it's just under 38%, which kind of coincides with what they say was the completion rate for season 1 of the Rings of Power, which means a lot of people tuned in for the first episode of the first season and then checked out and pretty much just haven't come back. But you're probably wondering where this viewership data is coming from because it said in the article it's coming from Samba TV. Samba TV, a television technology company that offers real-time insights and audience analytics, collects data from a panel of 3 million terrestrial TVs, which is 100 times larger than Nielsen's collection of 45,000 homes. However, Samba TV doesn't collect data from mobile viewership, so it doesn't show the full picture, but paints a fairly accurate one of viewership interest from season to season. And I think that's the important takeaway from this, because I know some people, when they talk about these third-party sites, they're like, well, that's not accurate numbers. It's higher than the 902,000 that they're reporting. And that may be the case, but I think this is the important point, is that they have a consistent methodology in how they measure their viewership of these shows. And according to their methodology, we're seeing a 60% decline in viewership from the first season to the second season, which indicates that just people aren't watching this as much as they watched the first one. And that can almost be reflected in the audience scores on Rotten Tomatoes too, because you see with season 1, this brought in a lot of people who liked the Lord of the Rings series, whether it's the books, the movies, or a combination of the two. They decided to tune in for the Amazon show and they didn't like it, so they gave it a bad rating. You see with season 2, it's a little bit higher, but I think that's because most people didn't even bother watching it, at least not as great a number. So the only people who are going to be watching this and rating this are people who watched the first season, were fine with the first season, and are on board with the second one. So you're going to see it's a little bit higher. Still, that's not necessarily a good number, but this is probably why we're seeing this slight bump right now, is because of audience apathy. People just aren't even bothering watching it and rating it. And as a result, you're going to see the only people who are going to be given the ratings are the people who are more inclined to actually watch the show. Basically, people who are more inclined to actually watch the show. Amazon hasn't released any of its own data regarding viewership of season 1 or 2 of the Rings of Power, only claiming that season 1 gave the streaming service the biggest premiere viewership of any Prime Video original. Season 1 of the Rings of Power also did well on the Nielsen streaming charts, totaling 1.25 billion minutes viewed in its first week. And you just know Amazon is never going to release the actual numbers to what they're getting because they don't want people to know how good their viewership is. But if it was just astronomical, then they would be telling everyone that. They'd be screaming it to the high heavens that how good their show was doing. But the thing is, they can't do that. And I think it's actually much worse than what they're trying to let on. In fact, maybe even Samba TV or Nielsen are inflating what Rings of Power is actually getting, and the real numbers are much worse than what Amazon is trying to present. But they're just going along with this because it just helps them. But right now, when we're seeing other sites like Samba TV say that viewership is declining, they're going to try to boast about like, oh, well, look at the premiere of season 1. That did so well. It's like, well, yes, it was a Lord of the Rings series. It's going to do well. Everyone's going to tune in to watch it just to see how it is. But the fact of the matter is people didn't stick around because they didn't like what Amazon was doing for it. So when this is all said and done, it's looking like Amazon's going to spend $1 billion on a franchise that's probably going to lose them money. And if you're one of the people out there who actually likes Rings of Power, I'm not going to say you can't watch it or you shouldn't like it. You're allowed to like what you want. But just understand that the majority of people don't agree with you on that one. And there's really nothing wrong with people who don't like the show. Just like I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with people who actually like the show. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think that the Rings of Power season 2 is doing worse than the first season? Or do you think it's actually doing better off? And a lot of this stuff is just, I don't know, it's just misreporting or something like that. Comment below. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And if you can, click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.